Batman has finally arrived in theaters, which means it's time to start speculating about the inevitable sequel. But while director Matt Reeves has teased the prospect of a trilogy of Batman films, it's not immediately clear what the sequel will be about. Unlike the MCU or DCEU, there are no cryptic post-credit scenes hinting at what's next for Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne, aside from a quick flash of a Riddler-style screen, that is. Even so, the movie leaves enough loose ends that we can begin to piece together some likely plot elements of the Batman 2. Not only that, but Batman's vast comic book library may just give us some clues as to what's happening next. Let's break it down. Batman draws more than a little inspiration from Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman Zero Year comic, which also deals with a younger Caped Crusader facing off against the Riddler for the first time. And perhaps the biggest similarity, the movie shows Gotham being flooded after Riddler blows up the city reservoir. Riddler's bombs destroy the city's seawalls in the movie. In Zero Year, that flood sets up the third act of the story, as Riddler seals off Gotham from the outside world and unleashes his most ambitious puzzle yet. In the movie, however, that flood comes at the very end of the main conflict. It's not entirely clear what the long-term ramifications of Gotham's devastating flood will be. The movie ends with Selina Kyle leaving for Bloodhaven, deeming Gotham beyond saving, while Batman stays behind to help his city recover. This could be setting up a sequel inspired by 1999's Batman No Man's Land crossover. No Man's Land is set after Gotham is ravaged by a massive earthquake. Rather than attempt to rebuild the city, the government opts to evacuate most of the population, set up a blockade around Gotham, and leave the city's gangs and costumed criminals to fend for themselves. Only Jim Gordon and a handful of honest cops stay behind to protect those who refuse to evacuate. Even Batman is MIA for months, as Bruce Wayne dedicates himself to lobbying the government to save Gotham rather than condemn it. It's easy to imagine Riddler's terrorist attack creating a similar situation for this version of Gotham City. If enough people echo Selina's belief that Gotham is too far gone, the city may be written off as a lost cause. That would leave this new generation of costumed psychopaths like Riddler, Joker, and Penguin to carve up a lawless Gotham for themselves. This new status quo would also likely fit in perfectly with Bruce's ongoing character arc. To save Gotham from a disaster of this magnitude, Batman has to learn how to be more than a vigilante striking fear in the hearts of criminals. He has to become a figure who inspires hope in the hopeless, downtrodden of Gotham. We get a glimmer of that in the film when a woman Batman is helping touches his arm in gratitude. She's not scared of it. She sees a hero. In addition to the lingering question of how and if Gotham will rebuild after the flood, the Batman gives us one other important clue as to the direction of the sequel. One of Riddler's online videos features the word "Hush" scrawled in the background. Hush is both the name of a hugely popular 2002 comic storyline and the villain introduced within its pages. Batman Hush is a sprawling mystery that pits Batman against many of his most popular villains. At the center of this mystery is Hush himself, a bandaged villain who plots against the Dark Knight while quoting Aristotle. Hush's identity is ultimately revealed to be Dr. Tommy Elliot, a childhood friend of Bruce whose jealousy drove him into madness. What does all this have to do with the Riddler? In the original comic, Riddler is revealed to be the true mastermind behind Hush's plot. The two villains join forces after Riddler deduces Batman's secret identity, a feat Paul Dano's Riddler still hasn't managed by the end of the Batman. And in the 2019 animated adaptation, Hush is actually revealed to be Riddler himself, his way of creating one final puzzle for the Dark Knight before succumbing to terminal brain cancer. Assuming the Batman 2 builds on this Hush tease, its version of the story will be more in line with the animated version. Not to mention that elements of Hush are already used in the Batman, so a direct adaptation in the sequel is probably unlikely. The first movie already establishes a long-running connection between Bruce and Edward Nashton. We even learn that Nashton sees Batman as a kindred spirit and an inspiration in developing his own costumed identity. With Riddler's civilian identity exposed, Nashton may develop the Hush persona as the next phase in his evolution as a serial killer. And one other thing, the film reveals that the reporter investigating Martha Wayne's history of mental illness had the last name Elliot. Is that just a coincidence or another clue towards the debut of Hush? One intriguing possibility is that this reporter was Nashton's father, and Tommy Elliot was his original name before he came to the orphanage. In this universe, Edward Nashton and Tommy Elliot may be one and the same. Reeves has described Pattinson's Bruce Wayne as essentially a drug addict who's grown obsessed with his nightly outings as Batman. Interestingly, one scene in the film shows Batman injecting himself with an unknown liquid substance after taking a shotgun blast to his armor, helping him leap right back into the fight. That glowing substance may be nothing more than adrenaline, though the bright coloring is certainly unusual. We can't help but be reminded of another drug with a long history in the Batman franchise, Venom. Venom is best known as the steroid that gives Bane his superhuman strength, but before Bane was introduced in 1993's Batman Vengeance of Bane #1, Batman himself battled an addiction in the story Batman Venom. In that tale, Batman is pushed over the edge after failing to save a kidnapped child. He begins taking the experimental Venom drug, which boosts his strength but quickly saps his sanity. Only through sheer willpower is Batman able to overcome his dependence on Venom to prove to himself that he doesn't need super strength to protect his city. Could Pattinson's Bruce face a similar struggle in the sequel? The series is just dark enough that a literal drug addict Batman isn't out of the question. Batman may not include a post-credits scene, but there is one major cameo towards the very end of the film. Barry Keoghan makes a brief appearance as this universe's version of Joker, an Arkham inmate whose unusual congenital condition gives him a permanent rictus grin. It's safe to assume Reeves didn't cast Keoghan in such an important role if he didn't have future plans for the Joker. In fact, the director recently told IGN there's another longer Joker scene that was cut from the final version of the film. That scene saw the proto-Joker playing a Hannibal Lecter-type role, offering his unique insight as Batman works to unravel Riddler's vast puzzle. That said, Reeves also made it clear that this cameo shouldn't be taken as a sign that Joker will necessarily be the main villain of the Batman 2. If anything, this reboot series seems to be taking more of an ensemble approach to its villain lineup, especially now that the stage is set for Gotham's costumed villains to fill the void left by the mob. The Riddler-Joker pairing brings to mind one important story from DC's current volume of Batman, The War of Jokes and Riddles. Another tale set early in the Dark Knight's career, The War of Jokes and Riddles sees the two villains declare war on one another for the privilege of killing Batman. Just about every supervillain in Gotham picks a side in this civil war, and Batman is all but helpless to end the bloodshed. This comic is also notable for revealing just how close Batman has come to violating his vow against killing. Batman winds up forming an alliance with the Riddler to stop Joker, only to snap and try to stab his new partner when he realizes the depth of Riddler's evil. Only the timely intervention of Joker himself stops Batman from becoming a murderer. That, as you might imagine, is just about the funniest joke the Joker has ever heard. A story inspired by the War of Jokes and Riddles could easily work inside this broken version of Gotham City. Perhaps the sequel will combine elements of that story and No Man's Land, creating a status quo where Gotham has been abandoned by the world at large and Riddler and Joker are locked in a devastating gang war. If so, Batman will really have his work cut out for him next time. Despite the tease at the very end of Batman Returns, we've never seen Catwoman appear more than once in any given series of Batman movies. But fans of the Bat-Cat dynamic can rest easy, as Zoe Kravitz's Selina Kyle seems all but guaranteed to return in a future sequel. If Bruce's long-term character arc involves morphing from vigilante to legitimate hero, Selina's will probably involve learning to ignore her own interests and fight for the good of the city. She may have left Gotham for now, but it seems inevitable that something, either her lingering attraction to Batman or her own troubled past, will compel Selina to return. We'll no doubt see Batman and Catwoman grow even closer, perhaps even becoming a true romantic couple as they now are in DC's comics. Given that Selina seems intent on robbing from Bloodhaven's wealthy elite, it's also possible she'll return to Gotham to steal from Bruce Wayne as punishment for not doing enough to help the city. So just wait till she finds out what Bruce does with his knights. And it's worth pointing out that Catwoman plays key roles in several of the stories mentioned before. Hush is the story where Batman finally reveals his identity to Catwoman and makes an honest go at building a relationship. Catwoman is one of many characters caught up in the events of No Man's Land, and as for the War of Jokes and Riddles, the entire story is framed as a conversation between Bruce and Selina, with Bruce recounting the events leading up to his darkest secret before he and Selina take the plunge into marriage. So, there's no shortage of ways Selina can make her return in the next movie. Which comics do you hope will inspire the next Batman movie? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe to IGN wherever you watch.